So I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. So now that we've got Mailgun set up, we can go in and make sure that we've got the data that we need inside our Python application to send emails later on. So what I'm going to do is go into the alerts and create a new Python file inside the alerts package called constants. And as I've mentioned before, don't worry about that pop-up window that appears in my project but not in yours. It will appear in yours soon enough after we start studying about Git. For now, that's something I've got here so I can share the code with you more easily, but you don't need to worry about it just now. So there are three things that we need in order to be able to send data to Mailgun. We need a URL, we need an API key, and we need a from. This is from the sandbox account that we're using for testing purposes. In order to send the data, we're also going to need a to, don't know what that was, sorry. We're going to need to and a subject. And potentially some content as well. But these are going to come later because they're not constants. We're going to want to send emails to different people potentially. So the URL we're sending data from is going to be something along the lines of https://api.mailgun.net, and in my case it's v3 for version 3 of the API, and then sandbox, and then a bunch of numbers and letters, .mailgun.org/messages. So as you can see, this has some resemblance to the API that we are making here ourselves. In their case, their base URL is api.mailgun.net/v3, and then they've got this sandbox numbers.letters.mailgun.org. That's my account, my sandbox account, and then messages is the endpoint of the API that we're calling. We're calling the messages API, and we do a post request to this endpoint to tell it to send the data that we are giving it. So that's how the API works. So you're going to need to replace this with your own sandbox server. The API key is going to be something along the lines of key dash and then numbers and letters. And you're going to need to replace that with your own API key. And finally, from is going to be something along the lines of mailgun sandbox and then postmaster at sandbox. And then you'll have to have that there. .mailgun.org. So it'll be something along those lines. Once again, this is going to be unique to your sandbox account. Your sandbox domain, rather. So once you've got this data in here, then we're going to be able to go ahead and start sending emails using Mailgun. So make sure to put those in here in the constants. And I will do the same, so we will not be revisiting this file again, because I'm going to be putting my details in there. And as I told you before, you especially don't want to be sharing your API key with anybody, but you want to avoid sharing these details with other people as well, just so they can't send emails in your name. So put your details in there, and then we'll start making the alerts and making sure that we are sending emails where appropriate. I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. So let's start sending some emails. We've got the basic alert class here defined, and what we've defined is that the alert takes in a user object, a price limit, which is when, well, essentially what the user asked us to email them with, and then an item. As we can see from the representation that we decided earlier on, the user is an object because we access the email using .email. And the item is also an object because we access the name using item.name. Remember, if these were dictionaries or data coming from the database directly without being an object, we would access them using square brackets, like so. This would be accessing the dictionary data, and if we use a dot, it means we're accessing object data. So we know the user and item are objects. And the price limit is here, so we can tell the user, hey, we found a new deal. You told us to email you when we hit this price, and actually the price is this new price. So we want to do that. So what we're going to do is create a method called send. And this send method is going to use the Mailgun API to send the user an email telling them that we found the alert. Well, we've got an alert because the item price has gone down. So what we're going to do is say return requests.post, and we're going to need to import the requests library. And then simply say alert constants, which we're going to need to import as well. Import src.models.alerts.constants as alert constants. .url with the authentication, that is API and then alert constants API key. And finally data equal to from alert constants.from to being self.user.email, subject alert or price limit reached for format self.item.name, and finally the text we found a deal, and link here as well. So we'd probably want to link them to the item so that they can more easily access it. But this is the bare bones of what we need to send them an email when we find an alert. However, something we have to remember is that this method isn't going to call itself. So something is going to need to call this method. And this method has to be called when we find a price limit. And right now, there's nothing in our program actually searching and looking at these prices and figuring out when they go down. So what we need to do is figure out a way to keep searching constantly in a repeating basis, maybe every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes, to make sure that we're finding the prices when they go down, and preferably within a reasonable time frame as opposed to a day or 2 days, because often these deals may only last for a few minutes or a couple of hours. So this is something that we're going to have to think about, and we're going to do that in the next video. So I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back. So in this video, let's figure out how we're going to get our alerts to check the prices every X minutes and make sure that we're sending the emails to our users when a new price does come up. So we don't want to be too late, but the other thing to consider is we can't check every second or every 10 seconds because we've got to load the pages. For every price that we want to check, we've got to load the page, parse it, find the price, and compare it. So there's a bit of work that needs to be done by our program to check each price. So we don't want to be checking all of our prices, say every second or every 10 seconds, because that may be a bit too difficult. It may require too much computing power. And remember, our users are not going to pay for this service, at least not in its basic form that we've got it right now. Another thing to consider is, what if we have 10 alerts? Can we check them every second? Probably. What if we've got 1,000 alerts? Could we check them every second? Now it's starting to depend on our computing power, how fast our server is, and also the internet connection that it's got. Can it download 1,000 pages per second? I'm starting to doubt that. And then what if we've got 100,000 pages or 1,000,000 pages? These things are things that, although it is often good to not get your head clouded with optimizations for your service before your service is actually working, it's still something you have to think about before you start hacking away code. So can we check all of our alerts every second? Definitely not. Can we check them every 10 seconds? Definitely not. So let's try for a figure more reasonable, like 10 minutes. And I think this is a good number, because deals don't usually last 10 minutes, they usually last an hour or more. So 10 minutes gives us a nice window where there's some time between each check, and it means that our users aren't going to miss out on anything. Something else to consider is, if we've got 10,000 alerts, and we tell our program every 10 minutes, check the prices for all our alerts, then essentially what it's doing is it's checking 10,000 per second, but it's only doing that once. So it's checking 10,000 alerts in 1 second, or in one instant in time, and we don't want to do that. We want to spread out the alerts over time. So the best option, I think, is to add to our alert a new property, which is the last time that it was checked. And this last time that it was checked will be at the time of creation. I will need to import the datetime module. So what this is doing is it's saying when we create the alert object, the last time that the alert objects were checked was right now. However, we're also going to be loading this from the database. So if the property is coming in from the database, it means the alert already existed in a database, and we want to load the last checked value that is stored there. And if it wasn't, then we want to create a new one. So we're essentially doing the same thing as the ID. So we could say this, last checked is none, and then we'll say last checked is datetime.datetime.utc now, if last checked is none, else last checked. So we're doing exactly the same as with our ID. When we load the item from the database, we would give our constructor the 5 properties here, and then last checked would not be none because it would be a value from the database. So it would load that database's value. And if it is none, because we're creating this from scratch, then we would assign to it the current date and time. Okay, so this works, and it kind of makes sense to leave it like that. And then what to do is say every 30 seconds or every 10 seconds, check the items that haven't been checked for 10 minutes. And that way we can split the load depending on when the items were created and when they were last checked. So what we're going to do right now is create a method to find in the database the alerts that haven't been checked for the past 10 minutes. So let's do that just now. So let's create the method find last updated, or find needing update, for example. And here what we'll pass is the number of minutes since update. And let's give that a default value of 10. So every 10 minutes we'll check, but we can potentially change that. We could put that in a config file, and such as the alert constants. We could do anything we want really with that. And in fact, that may be a good idea. So what I'll say is alert constants dot alert timeout. And then we'll go to our constants in here and say alert timeout equals 10. Okay. So now we can do that. And now these 10 minutes is going to be another date time. So what we'll say is we needed to find the alerts that haven't been updated in the time that has passed between now and 10 minutes ago. So last updated limit is going to be datetime.datetime.utc now minus datetime time delta, which is just a change in time. And what we'll give this time delta is minutes equals minutes since update. And what this does is it actually gives us a datetime object that is the current time, take away 10 minutes. So basically 10 minutes ago. And now we can say return CLS asterisk, and of course we'll need to make this a class method, but that's fine. CLS asterisk database. Well, we'll say database dot elm for elm in database dot find alert constants dot collection, and we'll need to put that in as well. And the query is going to be last checked colon and then another opening curly brace between quotes $GTE for greater than or equal to and last updated limit. Okay, so let's go to alert constants and put the collection in here and just say alerts, and that works. And then we'll have to import database as well. Okay, so what is happening here? Let me just do that. What is happening is we're saying for each of the elements in this cursor that we're getting here, then do CLS, so basically call the alert with the unpacked parameter. So this is going to give us an object of type alert for each of the elements in this cursor. And the cursor is reading from the alert constants.collection, which is just alerts. And what we're searching for is that the last checked time, which we're creating here, is greater than or equal to this last updated limit, which is 10 minutes ago. So hopefully all of that makes sense. But of course, we don't have any logic in here to write these alerts to the database or to make sure that they are updated when we check a price. So what we have to do now is add logic for saving to database, making sure that the last checked property is updated when it's checked, and also to actually check the item price and reload the item price. So let's do all those things, and I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. So in this video, let's just work on what we already know, how to save these alerts into the database. And as we know, we'll need a save to Mongo method, which simply does database.insert alert constant.collection and self.json. And we'll also need a self.json method, which will return a Python dictionary, which is the JSON representation of this object. So basically, the properties of it. _ID is self._ID. Price limit is self.price limit. Last checked is self.last checked. And notice that I'm skipping the user and the item because of the same reasons that we changed not long ago our item itself. So in our item, we were passing in a store before, but we couldn't really find a way to save it into the database. So what we need to do is, instead of passing in a user and an item, is passing something that we can store in the database. So the only option right now would be to save the users.json and the items.json for each alert. Because we can't save a Python object in MongoDB. We can only save things like strings and numbers and things like that. So we could say user is self.user.json and item is self.item.json. But if we do that, hopefully you've already noticed that we're saving here is the entire user details. In the user itself, we are already saving self.user.json for the user. So when we save the user to MongoDB, we're saving the user's self.json. If we do that for the alert that the user creates, it means we're duplicating the data. And when the user creates 10 alerts, it means we'll have 11 copies of the data, one for the user database, or for the user collection, and 10 for the alerts. So we do not want to do this. This is a bad thing. So what we want to do instead is, instead of pass the entire user object that we don't need, is pass what we need. So what do we need for the alert? What are we using this self.user for? And if we look, the only thing we're using it is for self.user.email, self.user.email. That's it. So the only thing we're using is the user email. So do we need the entire user? Probably not. We can do with just the user email. So I'm going to paste that in and then do Shift F6 to refactor, and then that changes everything here. And remember to remove those things there. And now, instead of user, we simply write user email. So now we've saved ourselves from the user.json. Let's do the same with the item.json. And we're also going to need to make a small change to the item as well. Self.item.json. So evidently, the only thing we can do here is, because we need the item name, we need the item price, we need to be able to reload the item price by going to the website and reloading and everything. And the way to do that is through the item object, through this load price method in the item class. We're going to need the entire item object. But what represents an item in our database? Just the ID. Using the ID, we can find the item. So instead of passing in the entire item object, let's just pass in the item ID and say self.item is item.getById and then item ID there. So I'm gonna import that, and so that was a bit fast. This method doesn't exist, so we need to create it, but that's fairly simple. We know how to do that. Def getById, and this is going to be a class method. And this simply returns return database.find1 item constants.collection, and then simply say underscore ID is item ID. So that's how we can find the item by ID, and now we can pass to our alerts the item ID, and we can just get the item by ID there. Small problem, however. When we are creating an alert, inherently we already think we are creating an alert. We don't think we are creating an alert and loading the item's price. To me, there's a logical disconnect between creating an alert and initializing its values and loading the item's price from the internet. That incurs some work that isn't immediately obvious when you're creating an alert. However, this is what we're doing, because when we do item.getById, and we go into the item here, and this returns the database, which by the way should be CLS***. This loads the item and creates the item object. We go into the init method for the item. We assign its values, get the store, which that kind of makes sense, and then we load the price in the constructor. And this is something that doesn't make sense. So we need to remove this from the constructor, evidently. That's the only way to do it. So what I'm going to do is say self.price is none. And then when we load the price, we'll say return match.group, but we'll also say self.price is match.group, and then return self.price. Okay, so we're updating self.price for the item whenever we load this price from the internet. Then the load price method no longer needs a tag name and a query, because it's going to get them from the object itself. So notice how before we were passing them here in the constructor, but now it's going to get them from self. So it's going to be self, and then self, and then it's going to be self.tagname, self.query. So now the item has these two properties. We're going to be saving them to the database momentarily. Actually, no, we're not going to do that because we're getting it from the store. So now what it's doing is it's storing them in the object itself and then using them in the load price method when that gets called. But it's not going to get called automatically by the creation of an item. So when we get an item from the database, that isn't immediately going to incur on a massive search for its price. It's just going to be like, this is the item. There you go. Now you can load the price if you want, or just get the name of it or whatever it is that you need from that item. Okay, so what to do now is here say item underscore ID is self.item dot underscore ID. And notice that Python doesn't really like that because we're accessing a protected member. So any variable that starts with the underscore, Python treats as protected. Other classes shouldn't access that. But for the purposes of this, we can just ignore that warning. It's just that, it's a warning. So we can ignore it because we know this is what we want to do. We're not changing it. Changing things is when the problem really begins. So we're just reading it, so that's fine for us. And now we can save this to the database. In the next video, we're going to look at how we can now reload the price every X minutes. So I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back. So in this video, let's actually get our alerts updated, get our price updated for our items. The first thing I'm going to do is create a method in the alert that is going to reload the item price. So this, the only thing it's going to do is say self.item, load price. That's it. And now it's also going to return self.item.price. So we're returning the item's price, but also self.item.price is now going to be updated as well. So load item price will return the price, but we can always access the price later on without having to reload the price with this self.item variable. Okay, so what do we have now? We've got a way to get the alerts that haven't been updated in the last 10 minutes. We've got a way to save the alerts to MongoDB, and we've got a way to load the item price. What we don't have is the updating of the last checked. So what we'll do here is self.lastChecked is datetime.datetime.utc now. And now we're also updating when it was last checked, which is right now at this moment after we run the load price method. So we'll load the price, we'll update last checked to be the datetime right now, and then we'll have to save to MongoDB again. That is because after we update the last checked, we need to make sure that we're saving it to Mongo to make sure that we are not then checking it again in the next 10 seconds when we run the operation again. So this could run every 10 seconds. Simply load the price, update the alerts price, and then potentially send an email or not, depending on whether the item's price is or isn't where we want it to be. So that's the last thing. Send an email if the price is appropriate or not. So I'm going to call it send email if price reached. And what it's going to do is if self.item.price less than self.price limit, then say self.send. Excellent. So that's all we need. And now that will send the email if the price has been reached, essentially. So, next thing to do is go into our source folder, right-click it and create a new file. And I'm going to call this alert updater. And this is simply going to be a script. It's not going to be a class or anything. The only thing it's going to do is say, find all the alerts that need an update and send the email if the price has been reached. So, alert, find needing update. We need to import that. So notice how the default is the alert timeout method that is a constant. So we're going to just leave it at that. And now this gives me a list of alerts that need the price updated. So then for alert in alerts needing update, say alert dot load item price, and then alert send email if price reached. And that's it. So now we're ready to run this file and send emails if the prices have been reached or not. What I'm going to do first, before showing you this, is get some data into my MongoDB instance, and I'm not going to bore you with that. So I'll see you in the next video, where we're going to have data in, and then we're going to check whether this works or not. I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be running our updater and see if we get any emails. However, there are a few problems with our code that we're going to be fixing as well in this video. Initially, we're not going to be receiving any emails because we're not going to be finding any alerts. So the first thing to do is to make sure that your Mongo instance is running and that you've got data in it, which is what I've done. And then go to your alert updater and press play. The first error we get is the usual error which we've seen before, which is that when we try to return database.database collection find, it says none type error, none type object is not subscriptable. So the subscript is this square bracket collection, close square bracket, that's what the subscript is, and it's saying that none cannot be applied a subscript, which means that database.database is none. So the problem here is that we've not initialized the database. So we'll simply say database.initialize, and we'll have to import that. Okay, so let's press play again. I noticed that nothing happened. Now, nothing would happen because we're not printing anything out to the screen, but it didn't take very long. So remember, we're having to request the page, parse it, find the price, and then send the email. So all of that is actually going to take a couple of seconds. So I know that this is not working, barring the fact that I haven't received any emails. So what to do is one of two things. So there's an easy path to trying to fix this, and there's a slightly more cumbersome path that will provide more coverage and more confidence in that we fixed the problem. And it actually might end up being faster if done with some experience. So after you do it a couple times, it will end up being faster. Initially, it'll feel slower. The first solution that is simple is to go into the method. So for example, find needing update. Go in there and then print things out, or like print out the last updated limit to see when that limit is, or come back to the alert updater and here print alerts needing update, and then we can run it again and see what gets printed, and notice that nothing gets printed out. So this is a way to do it. Every step of the way, print things out and check the console to see if what you're printing out matches what you would expect. However, as you can imagine, this can be a bit of work because, well, there's a lot of places where things could be going wrong and we don't know where that is. So this is empty, and it shouldn't be because there is an alert in the database. So we know that something has failed previously, and previously can only be in find needing update. But we don't know what the problem is. So what to do is go into the method and inspect it, try to run it in our head as if we were the computer, and see if we can find any problems with it. Because we know the problem is here. So you'd run through it, you'd say last updated limit is the current time, take away a number of minutes. So the current time, take away a number of minutes, is going to be a time in the past. And that kind of makes sense. So this is correct. We want a time in the past, and we want to check when things have occurred after that time in the past. So 10 minutes ago, we want to check what has been updated before those 10 minutes, not after. So we'd say we want things that have been updated in 11 minutes or more. And that would be essentially less than this time here. So the problem is that we're finding when the last checked is greater than the last updated limit as opposed to less than. So we'd want here LTE for less than or equal to. So dates and comparing dates can be a bit confusing at first because you're thinking, why is one date less than another? And essentially a date is less than another date if it occurred before. So 10 minutes ago, and we want things that occurred before 10 minutes ago as opposed to after 10 minutes ago. So that's why we want LTE instead of GTE, which is what we had before. And this sort of mistakes happen all the time. And in fact, this is probably the most common, along with making mistakes in for loops and things like that are also extremely common simply because you do them all the time and then you think you know what you're doing and you rush it through and you forget, or you don't realize that you're making a simple mistake that is just shifting whether you're checking something is less than or greater than, and then that just breaks everything because nothing works. So LTE is what we need there to find things that occurred before 10 minutes ago as opposed to after 10 minutes ago. With GTE, we'd only be checking things that have been updated within the last 10 minutes, and that's not what we want. Okay, so aside from printing, the other way of finding errors is by using the debugger. And the debugger in Python and in PyCharm actually is quite good. So what we do is we set a breakpoint in one of the lines. So in here I'm setting a breakpoint in this line, and simply press on the side and then you get that red circle. And then instead of pressing the play button on the right, we can press the little bug icon. And notice how now our program gets to this point, and now it shows us below the console. And this debugger and the console here show us the current state of the program at this stage. So for now we haven't done anything. We've initialized the database, we've set the author variable, and we've imported these two things, and that's everything we've done. And as we can see, this debugger here shows us alert, database, which are the two things we've imported. Notice how they say type as its type, and that's because they're classes. And then we've set the author to be JSLVTR, which is me, and then we've initialized the database as well. So the database, if we open it up, we see that the database in caps is actually not none, which is what we do when we initialize it. When we initialize it, we set it to be the Mongo client. So this is not none, which means we've initialized properly, so all is good. Then what we can do is press this icon here that says step over. And what this step over does is it moves on to the next line. So in this case, it should move over to the for loop. And indeed, it does that. And notice how now alerts needing update has appeared here in blue, which shows that this is a new variable. We can open it up, and this is a list. So the 0th index, the first element, is our alert. We can open that up and then see its properties. So it's got the ID and the item that it's associated to, when it was last checked, which was yesterday at some point, the price limit, i.e. which price we're checking for, which is 50, and the user email that it's sending to, which is mine. So now this for loop we know should run, so when we press step over again, we know we should be going into this line here. And it should run because we've got at least one item in this list. So we can see that alert is now the first alert on that list, the only alert in that list. And we can see that here beside the code, and we can also see it at the bottom here in blue. And then we're going to be loading the item price. So what to do here is we can either step over and just go into the next line and see what happens, or we can step into. And what step into does is it moves us into this element, into this method here. So we would go into the load item price method and to the very first line of it. And then this self.item.loadPrice is going to load the price of the item, and we can again step over and move on to the next line of this method, or we can step into and go into our load price method. So I'm going to do that because I know there's a problem here and I want us to find it. Okay, so we're getting the request, and I'm not doing step into now because I haven't written these requests, methods, or things like those. I'm not really interested, and I know they work because they're widely used. So I'm not interested in going into them to analyze them line by line. I'm just interested in their output. So the request gave us a response 200, which as we know is okay, which means the request went well. Now we're getting the content, and there's some content there, as we know, so that's fine. And then we're gonna give it to Beautiful Soup so it can parse it and understand it, and that seemed to work as well. And then we're gonna look for the element, and notice how here we've got the span class now price item prop price, which is the element that we're looking for in this specific page. And then we've got string price, which is the string with the pound sign, 45.00. All good. We compile the pattern, do the match, and then say self.price is match.group. And now, if we go into self, down here in the debugger, we can see that the price is set to the string 45. And this is the problem that I was talking about. We'd ideally want a float here as opposed to a string. So what we're going to do is say float in here. Notice how the variables disappear, but the code does not change live. So we have to rerun this entire thing before we can proceed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a breakpoint here in self.price, then I'm going to stop the debugger, and then I'm going to run it again. And what this is going to do is it's going to take me to the first breakpoint, and then I can press the continue here, resume program, and that will take me to the next breakpoint, which is where we left off before. So here we've got self price, and now I'm going to go into self again and check the price, and we can see that it is a float. So that's what we wanted. Great stuff. Now we can continue, and that'll take us back to where this method began. So before we called this method, we were here, now we're here again, and when we press step over, we'll go into the next method as well. Notice that self.item.loadPrice will load the price of this item. So we can go into self, and then item, and then check that the price is 45, and indeed it is. So all is good. We can update the last checked which gets updated here to the current date and time. And then we can save itself to Mongo. And notice how that didn't go into the next line. And usually that means there is a problem. So I'm going to press continue because I know that an exception is going to appear. And that is simply because we were in the alert, we were here, and I pressed to move on to the next line. And instead of moving here, it actually exited me and went back up here. So it didn't go to where I knew it should go, which means there was a problem. And the problem here, if you press continue, you'll see it printed out, is simply a pymongo.errors.duplicate key error. Basically, it says that the alert with the ID that we were trying to save is already in the database, and IDs can't be duplicated. So that's a problem. It's saying we're trying to save the thing to Mongo, but it already exists there because the ID is already there. So we need to find a way to say, if it already exists, make sure that what we update is the last checked date and not insert a new element. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to update instead of insert. So if we go into our database down here and create a new static method and call it update, and the update method is going to take the collection, just as these. It's going to take a query and it's going to take some data. So the query is the element that we're going to find, and then we're going to replace the data of that element with the data that we pass in here. So for our alert, we're going to query by ID, and then we're going to put in self.json. And we're going to say database.database collection update query data, and then at the end, upsert is true. And what this upsert equals true does is it say, if we cannot find any elements with this query, then instead of update, do an insert. So it will simply insert the data into the database. So let's go back into our alert and say database.update here in the save to Mongo. And in the query, we need to say underscore ID is self.id. What this will do, it'll look for an element matching this, which will be the current alert, and replace its data with self.json. And self.json will have the updated last checked property. Okay, so let's run the debugger again and see if now everything works. So now everything should work. So I'm going to press step over and we find the alert. Then move into the first alert of the list, which is the only one that we've got. Load the item price. Now notice this is saving to Mongo as well, and this has a breakpoint there, so I'm not really interested in that. Save to Mongo, and indeed it continues over to the next line, which is what we would expect. And then return self-item.price, which we don't use, because nothing is getting assigned in here. And then we're going to send the email if the price has been reached. So if self.item.price is less than self.price_limit, and self.item.price is 45, which is less than 50, which is the price limit. So we should go in, and we do, and we'll send an email. So move on, and notice how now we get back over here, we press the next line, and it goes back to the for loop. It's going to see if there is any more to do, and when it realizes there isn't, it's just going to terminate. And there is the process finished with exit code 0, so all is good. And now, I'll be receiving an email within the next few minutes with this alert. So I'll let you know how that goes. And that's everything you need to make sure that this works. Remember that you can always make mistakes when you're programming. You can make simple mistakes like the GTE versus LTE problem or forgetting to initialize the database. And those are all fine. Simply read the error and understand it and make sure that you're able to fix it. And then remember, if you are not, you can always come and ask and get some help, because that's what we're here for. Okay, so hopefully all of that was okay, and now we are ready to get this into a web app, so we're going to be making the front-end application as well. So I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. In this section, we're going to be creating the front end for our application. This is going to involve creating the static files, the templates, and also finalizing any views that we haven't finished. And in fact, throughout the section, you'll find we're going to have to create a few more views to supply data to different pages. the first thing we do is go into the source folder and create our templates and our static directories. So that's going to be the templates directory and another directory inside the source folder called static. Inside static, we're going to create a few more directories: CSS for our style sheets, JS for our JavaScript files, which we're not going to have any, but it's still good practice to make them, and finally IMG for images, and we're also not going to have any, but we could potentially have one, which is the logo. Inside our templates, we're going to be creating folders for each of these models. So I'm going to be creating a users folder, a stores folder, and an alerts folder. And I'm not going to create an items folder because items are just objects that are used within the alerts, and we're not going to be displaying them in the front end at all. They just get created to support the alert and to hold some data. Okay, so the templates we're going to need are a few. The first one is base.html, and here we've got it. It's going to have a title, which can be pricing service or whatever you want to call your HTML files. We're going to have another file called home. And notice how this add to Git keeps appearing, but you don't have to worry about that at all. And we're going to have one called HTML_dependencies. And this is an optional one that is only going to contain some like links to Bootstrap, links to jQuery, and to our own static style sheets. The HTML dependencies and the home can be empty because they are going to be extending from the Jinja base template, and we're going to work on that in the next video. In the users folder, we're going to be creating a number of HTML files, and we're going to be creating alerts, which is going to show the user alerts. I'm going to be deleting the content of these as we go along. We're going to be creating login and register. Think of these. The login and the register are just going to be the form, and the alerts is going to be like the user's profile, where we're going to display the alerts that they've already created. Inside the stores, we're going to be creating one for the store page. So this is going to show eventually some information about the store. We're going to create one for edit store. This is going to show a form that is going to allow us to modify the store details. One for create store, which is going to show a form that will allow us to create a new store. And potentially one that is going to be store list. And this is going to show a list of the stores that we have in our pricing service. Finally, for alerts, we're going to be creating one for showing alert info. So when we have one specific alert selected, this is the page that is going to show us the information about that alert. So which item it points to and the price point that we're emailing. We're going to create another one for new alert. And we're going to be creating another one for edit alert. In this section, we may not get into the edit alert simply because it's going to be very similar to new alert and edit store and create store. Notice how create store and new alert are named differently, so it may be a good idea to change one of these so it is called the same. So the way we're going to do that is going to refactor, rename, and call this create alert. And that's just so they both have the same name and we're going to get confused later on. Okay, so in the next video we're going to be putting some content into these and starting development of our front end. Hi and welcome back. In this section we're going to be adding our first bit of content to our templates. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on one of these tabs and close all, and that is going to clear up the workspace. And then what we're going to do is go into our app.py And notice how we don't have any endpoint here except the user's endpoint to show some data, to render a template. So what we're going to do is tell our application that when we access the home of the application, we should render the home.html template. So the way we do that, as you know, is app.root, and then we give it a / only, and that tells Flask that we're going to have to execute this home method when we enter the home root folder of the application. So basically when we access the URL with nothing at the end. And what we're going to put here is simply return render template. And here we'll say home.html. And we'll have to import that. Notice how it says home HTML template is not found. And we're going to deal with that in the next video, so don't worry about that. Up here we've had to import render template from Flask. Okay, so let's now add some content to home.html because for now it's empty. So what we'll do first is, because this is going to extend from the base template, is we'll have to tell Jinja that this is actually a template that can be extended from. So what we'll do is we'll say inside the body, we're going to say block content, and here is going to be end block. And what this does is it says this block content here is a block that can have some content, but more importantly, it is a block that other files can overwrite. And what that means is that our home.html template can then say, I want to overwrite that block with the content I'm going to provide. And then we can provide that content here in home.html. Okay, so that is going to be there, and we're going to work on the home.html template in just a moment. But there is something that we have to include here as well in order for us to include Bootstrap. And that is going to be include HTML dependencies.html. So as you know, this file here is the file that is here on our sidebar. And notice how it also says that it cannot find it. So we're going to work on that momentarily. This tooltip that gets shown here is something that PyCharm is showing you. Remember that. It's nothing to do with your code. This is a perfectly valid template, but PyCharm is telling you, I'm not sure that this template is existing because I don't know where that template is. We need to tell PyCharm where it is, and we'll do that soon, as I mentioned earlier. So the HTML dependencies is just going to be a few links. So these links are the links to Bootstrap, and we're going to put them in here. There. Which I have copied earlier, just so I don't bore you finding them. But we can find them in the Bootstrap website, and when we go there, I'll let you know where they are. Essentially what this is doing is it's importing the Bootstrap styles and the Bootstrap JavaScript file. And these two together allow for some very nice animation and some very nice styling on our website without us having to do any work. And finally, it's also importing the font awesome style sheet. And what this style sheet does is it lets us add some icons, like a small user icon or a small login icon, things like that, that just make our website slightly more appealing. And I'll go over how to use that as well. So these three imports are going to be required, and we're also going to need one final import, which is an import of our app's style sheet. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to say link rel, and this is a style sheet, and the href, the hypertext reference, is going to be URL_4, and what goes here is static, and this is the static folder that we created earlier, and the file name that we are going to access is css/style.css. And finally, we just have to close that. Okay, so css/style.css doesn't exist yet, so we're going to go here and create it as a style sheet. I'm just going to call it style. And normally, a large application may have many style sheets. Our app is going to mainly use Bootstrap, and we're just going to have a couple of styles in there, so we can just use one style sheet. And because that's all the imports we need, that's why I'm putting them in an external file and just importing them in the base.html file. So we don't have to worry about that ever again. Okay, so now we've got the block here. We can go to our home template and tell Jinja that this template extends the base template. So the way we do that is very easy. Extends base.html. And then, now that this template knows that it is extending base.html, we can tell it to overwrite one of base.html's blocks. So the block we want to override, which is the only block, is the content block. And here we can print whatever we want. We can write whatever HTML we want. And I'm going to write hello world. Okay, so this is everything we needed to do in order to get started. We've got the app.py. We've got home that extends base.html and prints hello world. Base.html template that has just the basic HTML, some dependencies that it's including, and the block content. HTML dependencies are links to Font Awesome Bootstrap and Bootstrap JavaScript and our own CSS file, which we've also created. Something to note is that this include file command, what it does is essentially copies this and pastes it here. That is essentially what it does. So don't worry about it doing anything extra. Imagine it as being a copy and paste. Okay, so now let's run this and go into our app and notice how it says hello world. And now we're ready to continue development and get some content in here. In the next video, we're going to be sorting out these unresolved template references. Hi and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be sorting out these HTML dependency problems, and also I'm going to be telling you exactly how you can get this Jinja code highlighting in PyCharm. So let's go into our preferences by going into PyCharm and then preferences here. And what we're going to find is if you go under project to project structure, there's something that looks like this. Notice how up here there is a mark as, and then you've got the templates. So we want to select our templates folder and mark it as a template. So it's simply click on it and then click on templates, and notice how now it is marked as a templates folder. You may not have this option if you are using the community edition of PyCharm, but I could be mistaken. Then in languages and frameworks, we're going to select Python template languages and select Jinja 2 from here. And then press apply. Now these disappear and we can proceed with development. What I am going to do now is not something that you have to do if you don't want, but I'm going to rename all my HTML files to, instead of being alert.html, I'm going to rename them so they are alert.jinja2. To do that, I'm not going to do them all for you, but I'll do one. To do that, just right click it, refactor and rename, and change this for Jinja2. And the reason I'm doing that is so it's very clear when we see these files that they are not just plain HTML files. They are in fact Jinja2 files. And PyCharm will treat them exactly the same way. So you can do this or not, and it won't matter. But I'm going to do it, so in the next video you'll see my files all renamed. I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back. In this video we're going to be adding a navigation bar to our base template. Before doing that, however, remember to change your templates in your Python code to .jinja2 if you've decided to change the template names here on the sidebar. So the home.jinja2 template is going to have to change, and also in your user views, the register and the login template names are going to have to change to Jinja2 as well. Once we've done that, we can go into our base Jinja template and get started. I'm going to run the application, and here, run it here, refresh the browser, and notice how the content is, just like in the last video, to the top and left. So it is on the very corner of the screen. When we start adding our content, it is going to appear on the corner of the screen unless we tell it not to. And Bootstrap actually has already a class that lets us center our content in the screen, give it a maximum width, so it doesn't appear on the very far side of the screen, but instead appears kind of on the center. So in order to make our content do that, we are going to need to add a div. So here what I'm adding is a div that goes around our content. And then I'm going to indent that. So what that is going to do is it's going to tell Bootstrap, and in fact everything that runs this app, that this div has two classes, content and container. And those classes will tell Bootstrap that we want this content to be centered, and Bootstrap will deal with that. So refreshing this, notice how the content is now slightly to the side. And if we decrease the size of the window, that gap is smaller because Bootstrap understands that that is acceptable in a small device. Okay, fantastic. The next thing is going to be adding the navigation bar. So if we go over to Bootstrap, I'm here at the navigation bar section, which is just the nav bar here. And there is a lot of code related to adding a navigation bar, but most of it we don't really care about. Most of it is for these drop downs or this search box here or this other drop down. So that's most of the code in here actually. It's just for that. So we're going to go down and see if we can find a different one that is more suitable for our needs. And for example, here we found something, but they don't give us the entirety of the code. So we are not going to stick with that. And normally when you are looking for something to copy in terms of Bootstrap, you may find a good source of code. But if not a problem, we can write it ourselves using the Bootstrap classes that we've seen in that page. So the first thing was nav, and that is going to define a navigation bar. And then it's got a couple of classes, navbar and navbar default. And these classes are going to tell Bootstrap that we want to style this navigation bar in a specific way. So we're going to include them and say navbar default, and then close the tag. And then I'm going to add a div, which is called container, well, which has a class container. And what this div is going to do is it is going to allow me to center the content of the navigation bar, just like we did with our content there. And finally, the most important link, the navbar header link, which is going to allow us to display our brand image. So in here, this is this brand there. And here goes A, which is a link. Class is navbar brand. The href, which is where the link is pointing to, is just going to be the home of our application. The title is going to be home, and the name is going to be pricing. So I'm going to go back in here and load this up, and notice how now we've got the pricing brand there. So we've got something there that works. And if we click on it, notice how the page reloads, because this is taking us to this very same page. Okay, so after this navbar header, but inside the container div, and by the way, notice what happens if we change this container to a container fluid, is that the pricing suddenly moves to the side. So the navigation bar will span the entirety of the content, and with a container only, it will stick here, which is a slightly bigger gap, and I think that looks a bit better. Okay, so the next div is going to have an ID of navbar, and I'll go into exactly why we're putting that ID there in just a moment. And the class is going to be navbar collapse and collapse. So it's going to have two classes, and these two classes are used by Bootstrap to allow the navigation bar to collapse. And I'm going to show you exactly what that means in just a moment. Inside this navigation bar, we're going to have a UL, which is an element that describes an unordered list, basically a list of bullet points. And the class is going to be nav and navbar nav. So these two classes will describe a set of links. Notice how links are described using an unordered list, which is just bullet points, but then they are styled in such a way that they appear side by side and without the bullet point. So that's CSS that is doing that styling, removing the bullet point and putting them side by side. But in plain old HTML, this would be just a list of bullet points, and that's something that I find quite interesting. And then each of the list indices or list elements is going to have one of those links that is going to link to one of our pages. And links are described by A, which stands for anchor. And the href for this first link is going to be just something like stores. And there's going to be stores. And notice how it tells us it can't find that, but we'll get there. And the other li is going to be a href to something like alerts. So if we want to display a list of the stores that we support or a list of the alerts that are on the website, then these links are going to be used for that. Notice that we don't yet have the views in our application to support these endpoints, but we're going to have to create them. Okay, so let's refresh that and press refresh here. And notice how now these links appear beside the pricing. And that's fantastic. And if we do go to them, we get a 404 error. I'm going to inspect element, click refresh, and notice how the page content that gets back is a 404 not found. So not found, that's not very nice. Let's go back to the home page that has something a bit more interesting. Okay, and then inside this div, we're going to have another UL. And the class is going to be navbar right, and navbar nav, of course. And what this is going to do is it's going to align some of these links on the right side of the navigation bar. Notice how now they're all on the left, and I want a couple of them, the login and sign up, to appear on the right. So that's what I'm going to do. Li, a href is going to be sign up, or I think it's called register at the endpoint. I can't remember, but we can look it up. And here it's going to say sign up. And then another li, which has an href to login. And the thing there is login. And notice how now these appear on the right. So I find this actually quite nice. Notice how they've disappeared. Not too nice. But before they get too small, I find this quite appealing. How we've got some links on the right and a couple of them on the left. And Bootstrap lets you do that very easily. Okay, so why are they disappearing when we collapse the window too much? Well, let's look at that in the very next video. I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be looking at why our navigation bar links disappeared when we made the window too small. We're going back to the code here that we found at bootstrap.com, and the main div has a class called collapse and navbar collapse. And we had those as well, but we didn't really know what they were for. And what they're for is exactly for this. Notice how the ID here in this div is called bs-example-navbar-collapse-1. And notice how there is a button here that we do not have in our code that has a data target equal to bs-example-navbar-collapse-1. So there is obviously a link here. And then we've got an SR only span, so a span that has a class SR only that says toggle navigation. Now what SR only means is screen reader only. So we're not going to see this in our browser, but a screen reader is going to be able to tell the blind person what it is. And then we've got 3 spans, each one of them with the class icon-bar. Now I don't know about you, but this sounds quite familiar already the way I'm imagining it in my head. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to show you exactly what this icon bar is. So notice how the button is inside the div navbar header. So right there, and I'm going to press Command A and that to make it a bit prettier. And this button here is a button of type button. The class is navbar toggle and collapsed. And then the data toggle says collapse, and the data target, which is what we're interested in, is this BS example blah blah blah. So the ID of our navbar is just navbar, so I'm going to change that and say navbar. And aria expanded is false. So the aria tags are just for accessibility purposes in general. Wouldn't worry too much about them. The data toggle is what is this button going to do when it's pressed, and it's going to collapse something. The data target is the navbar. Okay, so with that info, keep that in mind, and let's go back to our page, refresh, and make this small. And now we get a button appearing. And notice how this button has 3 small bars. I wonder now what these icon bars are. And the SR only is what's going to be said by the screen reader when they get to this element. So the 3 icon bars, and when we press it, we don't get anything because we need some JavaScript for it to work. Indeed. But when we import that JavaScript, it will work. So let's go and do that. And the JavaScript we need is just jQuery. So the way I know that is, apart from the fact that it's happened before, is because of this error. So if you inspect element and then go to your errors, Bootstrap will tell you that we need jQuery. So that's not something that we've included, but we can do. So let's expand this window and Google jQuery CDN, which is this code.jQuery.com. And then we can go to the minified version, copy that. And what that's doing is simply giving us the entire of jQuery's code. We're going to copy that and come to our HTML dependencies and plug it in. That's it. So if we go back to our application and make this small, and now we can see that it works. So Bootstrap is happy now that we've got jQuery. Okay, so we've got our links here when the window gets smaller. And what that means is that our application is much more mobile friendly. Indeed, our menu is not going to disappear when they are in a small device. And this error is simply telling you that you don't have a locally stored library for a HTTP link. So we can download the jQuery file and store it locally, as well as accessing it on the internet, just in case this becomes unavailable. But let's not worry about that just for now. Okay, so we've got our navigation bar working, and in the next video we're going to be just styling it slightly better, and then we'll continue moving on. Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're going to be styling our navigation bar a wee bit more, just to give it that extra affordance. And an affordance in design is when the user sees something and immediately knows what to do. So we're going to add a couple of icons just to make it that bit easier. And the icons we're going to be adding are called glyph icons, and they're available with Bootstrap for free. So the way we use them is we simply find the appropriate icon. So for example, the user icon may be a good icon. Or we could use other icons like the login or register icons. Here's the login, logout, for example. So let's get the login icon and put it here inside our login page, well, link. And the way we use them is we create a span tag, and then we give it a class equal to that we've just copied. And then we'll go back here and refresh. And notice how now there's a login icon, but it's very close to the text. So if we add a space, that makes it a bit better. Okay, now we can see if there is a sign up. There isn't. Register? Nope. So we may have to use the user icon in that case. So what we'll do is we will create a span, give it the class that we've found, and then close the span and add a space. And now we've got this here. Fantastic. Next up, we are going to be adding different links if the user is logged in versus if the user is not logged in. So let's do that. These Jinja templates have access to a few Flask variables. Remember how in our user blueprint here, we added the email to the session email variable. All Jinja templates, in fact, have access to that session variable. So we can say that if the session's email is set, display a set of links, and if it is not set, display a different set of links. The way we do that in Jinja is say if session email, then we'll display a set of links, else we'll display another set of links, which are these, and then at the end if. So let me indent those. And if session email is set, we want to display a couple of links which are not these. They are essentially your alerts, and log out. So the endpoints are going to change. And similarly, the glyph icons have to change. This glyph icon can just change to log out. And your alerts can change to either, well, it can either stay as the user, because that's essentially what it is, it's the profile, or we can maybe find a better icon to use. So if we search for alert, maybe we could use this one. That one sounds good. And now, when the session is set, we will see these links, i.e. when we're logged in, and when the session is not set, when we're logged out, we'll see these links here. So let's go into the next video where we're going to improve this navigation bar just a tiny bit and get rid of these annoying yellow messages. Hi and welcome back. In order to get rid of these yellow messages, we're going to need something very special. And this special thing is actually unique to Jinja because of the way that Jinja is generated. The Jinja code, such as this if session email, is not created, is not read and used and calculated in the browser. So the client, me, when I'm accessing the website, I do not see Jinja code at all. This Jinja code is compiled and applied by Flask before giving me the website content. This is why we can use session email, because Jinja knows about this. And it's also the reason why we can use the URL for method that we saw here. This is actually a Flask method that we can use in Jinja as well. This is because the creator of Flask is actually the same guy that created Jinja, and he knew that this would be very handy, and indeed it is. So what we can do is access the endpoints directly using that URL for method instead of hard-coding the endpoint name here. This allows for a few benefits. For example, if we later want to change the endpoint, instead of register, we want to change it to sign up, we can do that without having to change the HTML code here, the Jinja code, if we use the URL for. So let's do that. And the way we do it is, as we know, URL for inside these double braces. And then what we give this URL for method is the name of the blueprint, which in our case is users, and then the name of the method that is sending us the data. So in this case, I think it's called register user. Let's have a look at the user blueprint. The blueprint is called users. This is the name of the blueprint, and that is the first part of this thing there. And the method is called register user. Perfect. Let's copy that and replace the login as well with login user. Let's replace the logout with logout user. I think that's right at least. And let's replace the alerts with user underscore alerts. Okay, so that's fantastic, and that allows us to now get rid of the yellow messages, and we know, as long as we don't change the method names, which really doesn't make a lot of sense, that allows us to dynamically serve these endpoints from our application correctly. Finally, the alerts and the stores we're going to have to serve as well. So this is going to be alerts.index, and I know these don't exist yet, but I'm going to make them just now, and stores.index. So I'm going to go into the alerts views and create another root, which is going to just be that, and it's going to be index, and it's going to return this is the alerts index. Perfect. And then I'm going to go into the stores views and create another one that says the same. Store blueprint.root, like so, index, and this is going to return this is the stores index. Notice how I'm calling the function the same, but that's okay because they live in different blueprints. So all is good. Okay, now if we go into our page and refresh, we'll have to run it first, of course. We can see that pressing the stores takes us to a not found. So why could that be? And quite simply, the reason is because Flask, when it's serving the page, does not know that that exists. We haven't imported it. So by the time that we are generating that URL for, Flask needs to know this exists, and the only way it does is if we import it and register it in the app. So let's copy this and paste it twice, and then change it to alerts and change it to stores, and then import the right thing, and also register them. So we're going to need to register the alert and the store blueprint. Alerts and stores as the URL prefixes. So now everything in the alert blueprint is going to be prefixed by alerts, and everything in the store blueprint is going to be prefixed by stores. We know that already. We've done that with the users. Okay, let's go back to our page and refresh, and we get now this is the stores index. So doing that, like that, we can go into the alerts, and that gives us this is the alerts index. Stores gives us this is the stores index. Perfect. You'll notice that I'm already logged in, and this is because I've been testing this system a few times, and the session has stuck as being logged in. But do not worry if you don't see that just yet. The thing is, we haven't yet implemented logging in, so don't worry about it if it doesn't show the same stuff right there. It should be showing the login and sign up buttons. Okay, so this is what we wanted to do in this video, set the navigation bar up, and now we're going to actually move into logging in. So I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. Before moving into logging in, we're going to be adding a homepage that is actually suitable for our application. So right now, when we go into our app, we see the words hello world. So, okay, that's not very professional, is it? So let's go into Bootstrap and find the component called Jumbotron. And this is actually a very nice component for a homepage. Here they use it for calling extra attention to featured content or information. We can use it just as a call of action to sign up or do something in our website. So what we're going to say here is a short description of what the app does, and then ask the users to sign up. It's very easy. The entire Jumbotron is just a div element with class Jumbotron, and that gives it this nice rounded background. And then a h1, which is a header tag, is the biggest header you can get, header 1, the smallest being header 6, h6, with the words hello world. In this case, we're going to change it to show pricing service or something like that. And then it's got p tags, which are paragraph tags for the content. And finally, it's got another paragraph tag, which is enclosing the link, which is a link to, in this case, learn more, and we're going to use it for telling the users to sign up. Sorry about that. So let's copy that and go back into our home page. And here, instead of the hello world content, we're going to put the Jumbotron. And I'm going to press Command A. I'm on a Mac. If you're on a Windows, it'll be Control A. And then I'm going to press Alt and Command L to re-indent the code nicely. And I'm going to change hello world to pricing service. In this p tag, I'm going to add a short description of what the service does. We scan online store websites to alert you of price drops in items that interest you. And I'm going to add actually a wee bit more information. Just sign up. A call of action. You always want this in your websites, by the way. A call of action telling users what to do to motivate them to do as you need, as you want. And get started by adding the URL of an item that you wish to track. We'll do the rest. And here, instead of learn more, we're going to say sign up. And here, instead of href being nothing, by the way, that's the norm for a link that does nothing, we are going to say URL for, and here users.register user. That makes sense. Okay, let's go back into our page and notice how we now can see the pricing service. With now a nice looking homepage. If we minimize this, that changes to fit the size of the screen very nicely. If we maximize it, that also stays nice and big. So fantastic component for a homepage if we have a very simple application. This is obviously not ideal if you have some sort of professional website where you want more information on your homepage, but for something simple like this, it is brilliant. What to do next in order to make this homepage more appealing would be to add content below it, some images, or some more information about what the product can do. But we're not going to get into that because this is a development course and not a marketing and SEO course. Okay, something else I wanted to do is make sure that, I'm going to copy that, the other pages have some content, even if not much yet, just so when we click on them, we arrive somewhere that tells us that there's nothing here yet. So I'm going to paste this, and I'm going to put in a P, nothing here yet. And what this is going to tell me is that if I arrive in a page and it's blank, I don't know if the page is blank or something prevented the content from showing. Adding nothing here yet means that the content is showing, but there's nothing there yet. So that helps me in development to make sure that I'm not chasing an error when there isn't one. Okay, so I'm going to add that. And that's everything for this video. But now we've got a nice looking homepage, so now we can finally go and do the login. I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. And there's something I just noticed. The past couple of videos I've been talking about doing the login, but actually having a login form is not very useful if we don't have any users in our system. So let's do the register form first, and they're actually going to be pretty much the same. So if we do the register form first, it's going to be very easy to copy it and paste it onto the login form. So what to do is, the first thing we want is for there to be a form. So I'm going to add the form. And forms in Bootstrap have styling just by default, just because they are forms. So we don't need to give them any classes or any specific styling. Bootstrap already knows forms have a specific style. But the components inside the form, the fields, can be grouped together in logical ways. So we can group the field with a label for the field. So what this means is each field will then have a label associated with it. And the reason why we want to do this is A, that's the Bootstrap standard way and it's going to look nice. And B, when there's a label associated with an item, with a field, it's very easy for screen readers to spot that link and be able to handle that properly. So we want to do that for accessibility purposes as well. The way we group these components together is by using a div. And it has a class which is form group. And this tells Bootstrap that this div is going to contain a group of elements that should be in a form and therefore should be styled like a form. Remember that the classes in CSS, these things here, are only for styling. They only affect what elements look like, and they do not affect where they are in terms of the structure. It may affect the position in the screen, but not in terms of the structure. So this div is always going to be inside this form, independent of whether it has this class or not. But the class will change what the element looks like, potentially where it is on the screen, potentially the size of it, and anything that is related to the style. But it's always going to be inside the form. Okay, and then we put the label, which is for, and here we put the name or the ID of the field. So the field is going to be called email, and the label is going to show email address. Okay, and the field is going to be an input of type email. And this type email of input is a new type of input, and some browsers, including type email as opposed to type text, will allow for some extra verification. So if a user tries to put an email, tries to put some content inside an input of type email, and their content is not an email, so it doesn't have something like Jose at School of Code, not me, I misspelled that. This is an email. Type email will know this is an email. If I try to put something like Jose, it will tell me this is not an email, you cannot do that. So type email is nice, only works in some browsers. It doesn't work in Safari, for example. Class is form control. And what this tells Bootstrap is to format this input as an element of a form. The ID is email, and the name is email. And the placeholder is also email, but this time with a capital E. And we'll look at exactly what that does in a moment. Okay, so that's this entire div, and I'm going to go in here and go into the login, users login, it's called, page. Notice how it shows nothing here yet because this is the register page. Okay, there's our email. Sorry, my bad. I thought I totally forgot we were doing the register page. Email. So this is the form. It doesn't look very nice, though. I must be honest with myself here. We'll work on that. Let's first work on the password. So I'm going to copy this div, put it down here, and the type for the input is going to change to password. And the placeholder is going to disappear, and the ID is going to change to password, and the name is going to change to password, and the label is going to change to password, and this is going to change to password. So everything changes to password. And now we've got the password here, and we can type, and notice how it changes for those bullet points. So this doesn't look very good because it's too big, at least in my opinion, it's too big. Let's fix that. So the way we can fix that is by giving the entire form our own style. So we want Bootstrap styles. I like the way the fields are rendered with the rounded corners. I like the label. I like how the placeholder is like dark, semi-transparent gray. I like that. But I don't want it to be that big, and I also want to give it some sort of background. So what to do is come back to our code and wrap the form in another div. And we're going to give this div a class that I'm going to call form size. So this class doesn't exist in Bootstrap, in fact, but we're going to make it. So I'm going to press Command A and then reformat this so it's nice and clean there. And let's go into our style.css and create this form size style. So let's do that. Perfect. What we want to do now is say the max width of the element is going to be 640 pixels. Okay, let's go back here. And notice how now it's shrunk. Fantastic. So that's how we tell the browser that the maximum width for an element is going to be that number of pixels. However, it's here on the side and I want it on the center. So what we want to do is tell the browser that the margins for this element, so the spacing between the left and the side of the element and the right and the side of the element should be the same. And the way we do that is we say margin, and here's the interesting bit, 0 auto. So the margin property in CSS is used to define the margins left and right and also top and bottom. The 0, the first of the values, is for the top and the bottom, and we want 0 margin. And auto tells the browser to make them equal. So make left and right margins equal. So when we refresh this, now the left and right margins are equal, and top and bottom there is no margin, which is the 0. Okay. Next, we want a background color. Right now it's transparent. We don't really want that. We may want something like F5, F5, F5. And this is a very light gray. And that's probably too light. So let's change it for E5, E5, E5. And that looks a bit better. Maybe E9, E9, E9. Okay, I think that's okay. But notice how the background is actually just touching the size of the content. So what we want to do is actually enlarge the content slightly, but on the inside. So there are two properties at play here. We've got the margin, which is the distance between the side of the browser and the left of the element, similarly the right of the element and the right of the browser. And there's another property, which is the padding. And the padding property is the distance between the outside of the element, which in this case is right there, and the first of the elements in the first of the components inside the element. So in this case, that padding is none, because the distance between the side of the element and the first component is 0. But if we increase the padding by saying, for example, 20px, notice how this is going to grow sideways. And now the content is going to be placed inside. So that's what we wanted. And finally, we are going to say border 1px solid F5, F5, F5. And what this is going to do is it's going to give the element a 1 pixel thick border, which is going to be a solid color of this F5, 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 which is a type of gray. And you can see Python gives you the color here on the side. And when we refresh this, it's now got a bit of color. However, F5 is lighter than E9, so we actually want something like E1, 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 which is going to be darker. And now there's a slightly dark border. We can change it to D5, 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 which is even darker, and that looks a bit better. I don't know if you guys can see that very well in the video, but for me, it's like just a very slight border, and that looks nice to me. And finally, a border radius. And notice that when you do that, PyCharm already includes these WebKit and Moz border radii. And what that does is different browsers, for example Safari and Chrome and Firefox, render border radius differently. So you need to tell it, WebKit, render the border radius with this size. Moz, which is for Mozilla Firefox, render the border radius with this size. And all of the browsers render the border radius with this size. So we need to give it the size of the border radius. So it's going to be 5 pixels. And when we refresh, now it's slightly rounded, which looks nice. So, okay, I appreciate this form doesn't look like a designer's made it, but I'm no designer, okay? I'm a software developer. So for me, this looks better than it did before, and I appreciate it is not perfect by any means. But slightly better, does the job. And the only thing that is missing is evidently, I just realized, the sign up button. So let's add that inside the form under the div. We're going to add a button of type submit. and that is going to execute the action of the form, which right now is not defined. And we're going to define it in the next video. So that is the button, and when we refresh, now we've got a sign up button here. So that's the button of type submit, and the classes that we need to give it are btn and btn default. If we do not give it these classes, it just looks a bit ugly. It looks like a normal Safari button. If we give it the classes, it looks like a Bootstrap button. Other things we can do is, instead of btn default, we can give it a btn success, and that makes it green. So if you prefer it that way, by all means, go for it. I'm going to leave it as default because I'm a grey, boring old software developer and I like grey. Okay, brilliant. So what to do next is make the form actually do something, because right now when we press it, we change the URL, but it doesn't do anything. So let's change that and make it actually register users. I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. So we've got the register form working, and there's a couple of fixes that I want to try before we move on. The first thing is that we've removed the placeholder from the password field, so now this appears very empty. So I'm going to re-add that placeholder. And notice how when we refresh now, we get the password there. So that may be a bit better. Let me capitalize the P. That may be a bit better. It makes it look just slightly better. Something else I'm not liking about recording these videos while I'm logged in is that I can't see the sign up button, so I can't click it to go to this page. So let's just quickly fix that logout button that right now doesn't do anything. Let's go into our user views. By going to users views here, logout user, the only thing it has to do is session email is none. That is all it has to do. And then it has to send us back to the home page. So the way we're going to do that is say return redirect URL for, and where it's redirecting is the home, which is inside our app.py. Home. Perfect. Remember that if we wanted to redirect to a method inside this blueprint, we would have to do .home. But if we don't do that, it's going to redirect us to the base home method, which is inside our app.py. Okay, so I'm gonna refresh, and now I'm gonna press logout, and now I finally can see these nice buttons. And when we press sign up, we go to the sign up form. Fantastic. Okay, I'll see you in the next video now that this is fixed and we can proceed with making the form actually do something. Hi and welcome back. So right now when we press the sign up button, what we get is the page refreshed and the email and password passed in here as what's called query string parameters. So the email gets passed and the password gets passed, but they don't have any values just now. If I change that, so then I get email equals hi. If I change the password, then I get password equals hi. So doing this is not very safe, as we discussed previously. So what we want to do is change that to be a post. So what we do is form method is post. Okay. We also want to tell the form where to go. So right now the form is going to user/register, and that's exactly where it has to go, but I like being specific and actually defining it here. So say method is post, action is, and then URL underscore for users.register user. Like that. And this has to be like so. Okay, inside quotes, of course. Okay, so when we do this, we are actually going to get a bit of an error. So I'm going to do that, sign up. And notice how we need to refresh the page. So I'll do that. Sign up. And now we get a bad request. Okay, so what is going on? And what's happening is that in our users, in our views here, we are expecting the password to be called hashed. And this is because of something that I mentioned earlier in the course, where hashing the password here in the form could be a good idea. And one of the reasons for that is because websites tended to be not very secure. So what I mean is, somebody that is spying on your internet connection can, even though this is a post request, see the data going from your computer to the server. And that's not good. So that's why I was initially an advocate for hashing in the client side, which is here in the browser. The browser can do the caching, and then the browser can do the part of the hashing, and then the server can receive the hashed password, encrypt it, and then put it into the database. However, with recent developments for secure sockets layer certificates, I don't think this is no longer necessary. So we no longer have to encrypt in the client side, because we can make our websites more secure by using SSL. And SSL, as I said, is secure sockets layer, and what it does is essentially encrypts the entire connection between your computer and the server. So we no longer need to encrypt the password, because it's actually the entire connection that is encrypted. Normally, the way you know that a website has secure sockets layer enabled is because it's HTTPS as opposed to HTTP. And also you normally see a little green padlock beside the website name. So this is why it's given us bad request. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop accepting a hashed and instead change it to accept a password. So when we do that and we go back here and now we try to register, we have successfully registered and we get this is the alerts page, which is what we would expect, because when we register a user, we then get redirected to the user alerts, which returns this is the alerts page. So that's the sign up form working, and now that we're here, we might as well just make the login form as well. We're going to copy the entire register form, go into the login page, paste it in, and change the URL for, instead of being register user, be login user. Instead of sign up, be login, and that's it. And now we can go back to the home page. Down here, we can go to log out, go to login. We can see this there, and the register and the login look exactly the same except for the button text. And if I log in, we also get redirected to the alerts page. So that's everything now working in terms of logging in, but now we need to actually show something in the alerts page. So let's do that next. Hi and welcome back. So the alerts endpoint is going to be showing the user what alerts they've created. But of course, in order to do that, we're going to need to render a template and give that template which alerts to render. So which alerts to display some information about. So what we have to do is find which alerts has the currently signed in user created. So alerts is, and now we need to find the currently signed in user. So before we can do that, we need to say user is user dot find by email. We don't have a method called find by email. So how can we find the currently signed in user? Well, let's have a look at the user model and see if there's anything here that can help us. Is login valid isn't going to help. Register user isn't really going to help because that's going to create another user. Save to DB isn't really going to help, and JSON isn't going to help. So we need to make a method that will let us find a user by the email provided. So that's going to be a class method, and it's going to say find by email. And it's going to take in an email as a parameter. And what it's going to return is one user that has this email. So the only user in theory that has this email in our database. So as we know, CLS dash, and here what goes is database.find1, the user's collection, and then that the email is the email provided. Fantastic. Okay, so now we've got a find by email where we can pass the session's email. And now we have found the current logged in user. Fantastic. Now we need to find the alerts that this user has created. So how do we do that? Alerts, alert.find by email. Can we do that? I'm going to import alert momentarily and see if we can find by email, user. There's nothing there. Alert doesn't have anything that will let us find by email. Let's remove the import for alert. And what we want is to go to the alert. Let's go into the model alert and have the ability to find a set of alerts by email. So let's do that. Def find by user email. And it's going to have an email and it is going to return a set of alerts. So I'm just going to rename that to user email. There we go. So this method is going to receive an user email and it's going to return a set of alerts that match that. So how do we do this? Well, we already know. Return CLS ** lm for lm in database.find alert constants messed that up .collection where user underscore email is user underscore email. And we are already saving, as we can see here in the JSON, the user email to the database. So this is something we can do. Okay. But if we now did alert find by user email, and then we did user.email, we need to import alert. And now this is the user views here. We don't really want to be dealing with alerts as well. So I don't like this because that is using two different models in the view of one model. So I don't like that. So what I'm going to do instead is go to the user model and say def get alerts. And then what this is going to do is return alert dot find by user email self.email. And I like this better, because now this model can worry about dealing with the other model, and that's okay because they are the same level. But one model's view dealing with two different models is just something that sounds a bit wrong to me. So I'm going to leave it like this, and now alerts is going to be user.getAlerts. And now instead of returning a string, we can return a render template. And this render template is going to be users/alerts ginger2, where the alerts are going to be the alerts that we have created. So remember, this is the name of the variable inside the template, and this is the variable that we've created here. And now we are able to go and render that template, put some content in it, and render the alerts for this specific user. So we'll see you there. Hi and welcome back. Before continuing, we're actually going to make one small change, which is to refactor the yet in existing file user constants. So we're going to be moving this collection, users that we're accessing in MongoDB, to another file called user constants. So this is exactly the same as we've done for the alerts. And as you can see, we've got alert constants here in the sidebar, and that contains the collection. So if we go to users and we go to constants, you can see this file exists but has nothing in it. So I'm just going to add collection equals users in there. And then in the user model, we can import src.models.users.constants, and this file is going to contain that collection constant. But instead of importing the file just like that, I'm going to give it a name that we can use, and we know how to do this already. So I'm going to import this file, and inside this user model, I'm going to call it user constants. So now, whenever we encounter this user constants, we can replace it by user constants.collection. And that's exactly the same thing, but now this has a name, and when we read that we're finding one from the user constants collection, we know immediately what this means. So that's just slightly better, a good naming convention there, and we can replace all the users for user constants.collection. And now that we've done that, we are ready to move on and start showing the user alerts. Hi and welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be adding the alerts for a specific user. So what we're going to do is be able to display what alerts a user has already created. And that is going to be here in the in the users.alerts template. So we're going to go here, and we've got some basic template here that says nothing here yet, and we're going to change that so that it shows the user alerts. This is going to have two components. One component is going to be the title, such as a page header that is going to tell our users where they are, and another one that is going to be the alerts. And the alerts are going to be essentially a list. And Bootstrap has a really nice way of formatting and styling these lists so they look like sets of components as opposed to like bullet points. So we're going to look at exactly how to do that. So the first thing to do is to create the page header. And a page header is just a div in Bootstrap that has a class called page header. And then we close the div, and inside it we can put a h1, which is the header 1, and then Bootstrap knows what to do with a h1 that is inside a div with this class. So alerts, and that is going to be the title of this page. So I'm now going to run the server and go into here. I'm going to close that, refresh, and now we can log in. And notice how now we've got the alerts h1 here. In the video it may be difficult to see, but there's also a very slight underline to alerts. And if we remove that div, if we remove this div here, you will see that that changes. And now there is no underline, and also the text might be slightly bigger. It's difficult to tell just like that. But that div nevertheless adds that underline, gives it a bit of spacing between the top and the title, and overall just makes it look a bit nicer. Not only that, but inside this h1 we can actually use another tag called small. And this small lets us add a description of the title, essentially. So we can say showing already existing alerts, and then we'll save that, refresh the page, and notice how now we can have a sort of a description that looks very nice there beside the title. Okay, so I'm going to indent that just to make it look pretty, and then we're going to create another div, and this div is going to have a class called list group. And now this is all in the official Bootstrap documentation, so you can find the component list group, and it tells you exactly why this is behaving the way it is. So this list group essentially lets us have multiple list group items. So I'm going to just create a sample link. As you know, A stands for anchor, and that's just a link somewhere else. But with Bootstrap, we can style this as part of this list group. So if we give any link the class list group item, then we can save that, refresh here, and notice how now something has appeared here. And when I hover over it, it kind of changes color as if to say, hey, you can click me. And indeed we can. We can also type h4, heading 4, and we can give it a class list group item heading. And you can imagine that this is going to be alert title. And when we refresh the page, we can see that now this has a small title in it. Underneath the h4, we can add a p with class list group item text. And here we can add a description of the alert. And notice how now that's starting to look very nice there. And indeed, if we were to have many of these, they just appear like that. So rounded corners on the sides, and then a nice separation between them. We can indeed click on them if we want to. So instead of having them like this, of course, we're going to be using a Jinja for loop. So for alert in alerts. And remember, we're already passing the variable alerts through our render template call here in the views here. Alerts equal alerts, and we're getting the user alerts. So we can do this. And down here, end for. Instead of alert title, we can use alert for, and then say alert.item.name, and that's going to give us the name of the item associated with that alert. And instead of description of the alert, we can say something like last price found was alert.item.price. Okay. Now if we refresh this, we get nothing because I don't have any alerts. So we need to go and add an alert over here, and then we can see something appear. So I'll do just that, and then I'll come back to the video and we can see what that looks like. Okay, so I've gone back and added an alert and an item to the database. And now if we go back here and refresh, you can see that we are getting our alert in here. There's a small problem though, which is that it says last price found, none. And that's not ideal. So we're going to try and fix that in the next video. Hi and welcome back. So let's figure out why the price was showing as none. So the first thing we have to do is think like the computer. Go to the user's views and see what it's getting here. So we're finding the user by email, which is the currently logged in user. And then we're getting the alerts. So the alerts are going to return essentially a list of alerts, a list of alert objects. So when we create the object, which happens up here in the init method, the constructor, we are setting the object's user email, price limit, last checked. All of those are coming from the database. And we're also setting the item ID. So this item ID then is used to create the item, and we search for that item in the database. Now that item also comes from the database, and when we create that item from the data that is stored in the database, we get the name and the URL. So what we're storing in the database is name, URL, and underscore ID, and we can check that here in the JSON method. So what comes from the database is underscore ID, name, and URL. So we set the object's name to be the name that's coming from the database. We set the object's URL to the URL that's coming from the database. Then we find what store this item belongs to with the regex search. And then we specify the tag name and the query, and we set the price to be none. And then we create the ID if it doesn't come from the database, or we set it as the ID that comes from the database. So the key here is that we're setting the price to be none. And with the thought, obviously, that we are then going to load the price, and then it's all going to be fine. So what we could do is say self.loadPrice, and that would be okay. But the problem with that is whenever we get the user alerts, so whenever we execute this method here and get the user alerts, that's going to, that's going to create an alert object. The alert object is going to get the item by ID, which is going to search in the database, and that is going to create an item object, which is then going to load the price. So basically, whenever we get the user alerts, we're going to create an item object for each alert, and that's going to fire up a search. And those searches we know take a couple of seconds. So if the user has 10 alerts, it's going to take at least 20 to 30 seconds to load that page. Not a good solution. So what to do is the only other thing we can do, store the price in a database alongside the name and the URL. And that's why the alerts have a last checked property. The price that's in the database may be old, but at least we know when it was last checked. So we can do this without a problem. We can say we're going to pass in a price, which is going to be none by default. And then here we're going to say none if price is none, and if not, then it's going to be price. Okay. So a couple of other things we have to do. When we load the item price here in the alert, we are saying self.item.load price. So we're telling the item load your price from the website, but we're never saving the item. So once the item's price is updated, we need to save that update into MongoDB so that the new price gets stored on the database. So as well as self.save to Mongo, remember this is the alert class, we need to say self.item.save to Mongo. Now, when we were updating the last checked property of the alerts, we had to change database.insert to be database.update, because if not, we got that error where the ID was duplicated. We're going to need to make that change as well in the item. So we're going to go into the item here and change database.insert to be database.update. And now the query has to be ID is self._ID. Okay. Finally, in the self.json method, we're also going to need to save the price. Self.price. There. Okay, so what to do now is run the alert updater method, file here, and that is going to update the pricing of all our items. Because remember, if we go to the website now, it's still going to say last price found none, simply because we haven't actually gone searching for the price yet. So I'm going to run the alert updater, and notice how that finishes, and then if I refresh, now we get 45.0, which is the price that we've just found on the website. Notice that we're not saying when we check the price, so that's probably something we want to add as well. So going into alerts.jinja2, we can inside this p add a br, which is a line break, and then say last checked on, and then just say alert.lastChecked.strf time, and that stands for string format time DMY, which is day of the month, month of the year, and year. And then we can refresh this, and it tells us last checked on 31/01/2016, and we can say at HM, and that tells us the hours and the minutes as well. So strf time, great method, and lets us format time objects and whichever way we want, and there's going to be a cheat sheet on how to use this as well. So now we've got the alerts, we now evidently have to work on being able to add alerts. So I'll see you in the next video. Before adding new alerts, let's see if we can display details on individual alerts, as that is going to just make sense. Now that we've got the list of alerts, being able to display details about one specific alert is going to be very easy. So the first thing we have to do is change this link so that instead of going nowhere, it redirects us to a page where we might get details about an alert. So that page would be URL_for, and then that would be alerts dot, and if we go to the alert views, which are not open here, that will be get alert page. Okay, so let's do that. URL for alerts dot get alert page. Okay, and we are going to need a parameter, which is the alert ID. So alert_ID equals alert._ID. Remember that alert is a variable here in Jinja, so we can say alert ID, which is the parameter we're passing to the view. We can say alert ID is alert._ID. Something I don't really like about this is that, remember, we are prefixing our alerts blueprint with /alert. So technically this endpoint is /alerts/alert with the alert ID at the end. So what I'm going to do is delete /alert. And now when we prefix this, is going to be alerts / the alert ID. And that's going to be a lot nicer. But remember, we don't have to make any change here on the URL for, because Flask will realize that for us and will change it itself. Something else I'm going to add is a couple of strong tags here. So I'm going to add a strong tag around the alert's price, and that's just going to make it bold, and a strong tag, sorry, kind of messed that up again, around that. Okay, so now when we go here, you can see that's now bold and just slightly more in your face. Okay, so now when we click on that, we get an error, but you can see that the URL is alerts/ and the alert ID. So that's where we want to go. And now in the next video, we're going to be working on actually making that do something. I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back. So in the last video, we got an error when we tried to go to the alert page, but we could tell that the URL had changed. So let's make sure that we are actually rendering the correct template and that everything that we wanted to happen is happening. Let's go into the alert views, and here in the get alerts for user, sorry, is that the correct one? No, sorry. The get alert page, we are rendering in fact the correct template. So the template we want to render is the template for a specific alert, which will be alerts/alert.ginger2. So let's render that. Return render template, and we're going to need to import this. And the template we want to render is alert.ginger2. Okay, so when we save that and go over to Safari and we refresh that, we should see nothing here yet because that's what is in the alert.ginger2 template. Okay, so in this template, when we call this endpoint, we're going to be getting the alert ID, and that's going to mean that we can get the alert object if we can get it from the database. So let's do that. Alert equals alert dot get by ID. We don't have a method like that, so we're going to need to go and make it. Let's find by ID, alert ID. And we'll import alert, and now we have to go and make this find by ID method that we already know is going to be fairly simple. So let's come down here, let's find the find by user email method, copy all of that, paste it down here, rename it to find by ID, and instead of a user email, it's going to take an alert ID. And alert IDs, as we know, are unique in a database, so we just need to do CLS, and instead of all of this, and that, we just need to say CLS of database dot find one, and the thing we're finding is the ID. So we're finding one element in the database in the alert constants collection where the underscore ID of the element matches the alert ID that we're passing this method. Then we are unpacking that dictionary and transforming it into the format of named arguments. And we've seen this in previous sections, how that works. And then we are finally calling the alert class on it, which is what CLS represents. So that is going to call the constructor with the properties that we found in the database. So as we know, that is going to come up here and create an object, and it's going to pass the user email, the price limit, item ID, last checked, and underscore ID that all are going to come from the database. And then we're going to get back an object that has these properties initialized. Okay, so let's go back into the alert views, and then into this alert template, pass the alert object that we've just gathered here. So when we go and refresh, we're still going to get nothing here because we haven't changed the template. So let's go and do that now. The alert.ginger2 template, here we're going to display some information. And in this video, we're not going to get much into what's happening here, but let's just print something out so we know that the alert is indeed appearing. So we're going to print alert.item.name. At least I think that's what the property was called. And indeed we get the Dexter item name here, which is the alert's name. As you can see, if we go to the alerts, that is the item name, Dexter there. Okay, so in the next video, let's work on that and make this look a bit prettier. I'll see you there. Before showing the alert page, let's actually include the ability to create an alert. And that's just going to let us and let you create alerts and verify that things are working before moving on to showing details for an individual alert when you may not have any in your system yet. So I think it's a bit better to be able to add an alert first, and then we're going to show the details for it. Adding an alert is going to be very simple. What we're going to do is just like what we did in the user's views, and I'm going to go there now. If you remember, we've got, for example, the register endpoint for the user that takes in requests with either get or post methods. If the request is a post method, then we are going to deal with incoming data. If the request is not a get, i.e. this line down here, we're going to present the user with the register form. So when the user has the register form and they press submit, what they do is they do a post request to this endpoint. When the browser arrives at this endpoint, what they're doing is a GET request. So when the browser arrives, we give them the form. When the user presses submit, we deal with the data that that form contained. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the new alerts here. So we're going to allow for GET or a POST method. And then we're simply going to say if request.method is POST, do nothing for now, but we will get there. And finally, what happens when there is a GET request, what happens if it's a GET request, is that we return the render template of alerts/new alert.jinja2. Okay, so what that means is that when we arrive at this new endpoint, if we are arriving with the browser, i.e. like Chrome or Safari, we are going to be doing a GET request. That's what the browsers do. And then we're going to be getting the form back. If we've pressed the submit button in the form, we're going to tell the form to send a post request, and then that's going to be able to deal with the data once we code that in. Okay, so what we have to do before moving on to creating the form is go into the alerts, user alerts template, and add a button that will let us create a new form. So under the div here, we're going to add an A, which is an anchor. And as you know, this is just a link. And we're going to give it the class btn and btn success. And what this is going to do is it's going to essentially display a button. The href for this is going to be URL for alerts.createAlert. And I think now this is starting to sound more and more familiar to you guys. And this is our A, and we're going to say create new. And then we're going to go over here and notice how I've probably misspelled the create alert, URL for alerts. Yes, I did misspell the endpoint. There we go. And now we get a create new button down here. Okay, I think it's missing like some sort of plus icon. So let's try and add a plus icon at the start and see if that looks any better. And it looks kind of half-assed, if you ask me. It looks like a plus icon that wanted to be a bit bigger, but it cannot. So instead of doing the plus icon, we're going to use one of those glyph icons that we talked about earlier when we're doing the navigation bar. And the glyph icon that we're going to use is glyph icon plus. And now that has a nice big glyph icon there. And when we press that, it's going to take us to the nothing here yet page, which is the new alert page. But we're going to work on that in the very next video. Hi and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be adding the form that is going to let us create a new alert. So let's go into the new alert template and notice how it says nothing here yet. So let's change that and actually put something in. The first thing we should be doing is create the page header, which is going to just tell our users where they are. And the page header here is going to be create alert. Okay, so refreshing, now we see create alert there, and that's looking good. We could optionally put the small tag inside the h1 and put some description there, but I'm gonna not do it in this page I don't think it's particularly necessary, but if you think it is, then by all means go for it. And then we're going to create another div with the class which we created in our CSS style sheet. So I'm going to go to the CSS style sheet and find out what the class was called, form size. Okay, so I'm going to copy that, go to the new alert, and give this form, this div, the class form size. Okay, and then we're going to create the form. And this form is going to have a method of post, as we know. And remember that we can also specify the action of the alert. This is which endpoint the form is going to send data to. However, by default, the action is quote-unquote the same page that we're on right now. So remember, if we go to the alerts views, the form is being served from the new endpoint. And when we press submit, it's going to stay in that endpoint, but it's going to be sending a post request. So when we access the form, we're going to do a GET request, we're going to get the form, and then when we press submit, it's going to send data to the same endpoint, but as a post. And then we're going to be able to deal with the post request there. Okay, so that's the form there. And now we're going to have a couple of form groups. Form group. Each has a label for the name of the item. So in this case, it's going to be name for the alert, and this is going to be alert or item name. And then we're going to have the input, which is type text, which is simply a text field. Class is form control. As you know, Bootstrap needs this class to display the element as if it were like Bootstrap form element, the nice rounded corners and things like that. And then we give it an ID and a name. And now both of these in my case are called the same. And the placeholder, which is simply what text appears in the input before the user has typed anything. So let's save that and refresh here. And now we can see that we've got the first field here. The div, this form size div, is the one that's doing this background and this border. And the element itself is only the label and the text field. So I'm going to copy that and paste it down here. And instead of alert item name, I'm going to type URL. And notice how if I refresh, now that appears there, but it says name, and also it has ID name and name in the input. So we want to change that. The label is going to be for URL, the ID is going to be URL, and the name is going to be URL. And the placeholder is going to be HTTP like that. Okay, so save that and refresh. And notice how now this is starting to look a bit better. Okay, let's copy that and add another one, and this is going to be for the alert price limit. So when does the user want us to email him when the item gets to a certain price? So alert limit, and this is going to be called price limit, for example. The ID and the name are going to be the same, and the price limit here, I'm going to set a placeholder of 45.0. So I understand that when we save this and we refresh, we've got the alert limit here. A new user might not necessarily know what this means exactly. So they may think 45, the alert limit, what could this be? How many days the alert is going to be available for? When is it going to expire? The price? They're not sure. So we want to give them a bit more information as to what this field is. So inside the input, we can use a property called aria-described by, and then we give the ID of an element that is going to describe this input. So I'm going to call the element price limit block, and under this element we type a P, which is a paragraph called price limit block, well, with the ID price limit block, and the class help block. So what this does is it tells HTML that this input type is described by this price limit block, and Bootstrap knows that an element with this class is going to be rendered in like dark gray text and that sort of styling. So help block is only Bootstrap. Aria described by is not only Bootstrap. And then we'll say, we'll send you an email when the price reaches or goes under this. Okay. So now we've got a nice little helper message there that's going to tell our users exactly what this is for. Okay, so finally we just need to add a button that is going to allow us to submit the form. So button, type submit, class btn default, and the text is going to be create. So notice how in some instances I'm using btn-default, in other cases I'm using btn-success, and that's just to match the kind of style of the page. So in this case it's all grey, and I'm using a grey button. In the your alerts here I kind of want to bring more attention to the green button, and it's mostly white background, so I think that looks a bit nicer. But again, you can change this however you want. You can change the background or the button. You can change everything. So yeah. So that's what we end up with, and now we can press create, and what will happen is nothing, because we don't have anything dealing with the post request here. But we're going to work that on the next video. Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're going to be dealing with this post request here to create the alert. So what to do is, first of all, get the details that our form is passing in. So name is request.form/name. The URL is request.form/ sorry, not slash, open closing square brackets URL, and price limit is request.form price limit. Okay, so now we've got the three things here. Remember that our alert needs an item to be existing in the database before being able to create the alert. So let me explain that a bit better. Let's go into the alert model and notice how in the constructor we are passing the alert an item ID. And then the alert constructor is getting the item by ID. The getById method finds the item in the database. This means that before creating the alert, before calling this constructor method, the item needs to be in the database already, which means we need to create the item and save it to the database before we can create the alert object. So let's go back into the alert views and first create the item. So item is item, and we need to import item. Oh, sorry, I don't know what happened there. There we go. And the item, as you know, takes in a name and a URL. Let's go into the constructor. Here, hover over it with the command key pressed, in my case, because I'm in a Mac, or probably the control key if you're on Windows, and notice that it says name and URL. Because we're creating a new item, we don't yet know the price, and it doesn't have an underscore ID, so that's all good. We just need name and URL. And then we say item dot save to Mongo. Okay, and then we can create the alert. So alert is alert, where the email for the alert, the user email, is session email, and the price limit is just this price limit variable that we got there, and the item ID is item._ID. Let's import session, and then say alert.load item price. And remember that this load item price method already saves the alert to MongoDB, so we don't need to call save to Mongo again. So let's go back into the alert views and make that clear. This already saves to MongoDB. And notice how the fact that we had to do this means that we've probably made some sort of mistake when naming our methods. So my bad there, my mistake. That method should be renamed into something different if we wanted to continue developing this application further. But for now, let's not dwell in that, and let's leave it like that. Okay, so now this is actually saving to MongoDB, and now we can actually deal with creating an alert. And remember, when this alert gets saved to Mongo, the alerts for the user is going to now be able to get it. So let's go onto the page, refresh this, and create an alert. So, for example, I'm going to go to my alerts and create a new one, call it Dexter2, and the URL, I need to find that, so I'll pause the video momentarily and come back with a valid URL. Okay, so that's the valid URL there. This is just a bookcase, and the alert limit is going to be 50. And we click create, and notice how that just sends us back to the same page, but without the details. We can go to my alerts, and now we can see Dexter2 is here, and last checked was on today, basically, just now. Because when we create the alert, it already checks the price for that item. And I'm saying both last price found at 45 is the same item, so that doesn't surprise me there. Okay, so let's continue developing the app in the next video. Hi and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be creating our first decorator. So a decorator looks exactly like this. It's got an @ symbol at the beginning, and then there's some code there. And what that does is it adds some functionality to an existing function. So in this case, the alert blueprint.root adds this method to the app as a root. So essentially it gets the method and adds some extra functionality to it so that it can now be used as an endpoint. And we're going to be creating a decorator like such, requires _ login. And what this is going to do is it is going to basically redirect the user to users.login if the session's email is none. If the session's email is not none, means they are logged in, and therefore we can show them the page. If it is none, it means they are not logged in, and therefore we want to redirect them to the login screen and tell them that they need to log in to view that page. So let's try and do that and see how we can do. So let's go into the users decorators file, and here's where we're going to put the decorator. So I'm going to create the decorator, and it's going to be called requires _ login, and then it's not going to do anything for now. And I'm going to apply this decorator on a function. I'm going to call my function. And this function is going to print hello world. And it's also going to return hi. So we'll get to why it's doing these two things momentarily. As you can see, Python is telling me that the function requires login lacks a positional argument. And that's because Python is noticing that we've got the @ symbol there, and therefore that has a special meaning as to what this is going to do. And indeed, if we right-click the decorators file and run it, we get the error that requires login takes 0 positional arguments. We haven't defined any in the function, but one was given. So what was given? What argument did we give it? Because normally we would give arguments like that. But in this case, actually, we haven't given any arguments. But in fact, all decorators take one argument, which is the function they are decorating. So we are indeed passing this entire function to this requires login decorator. And we can see that that is the case by adding the func, or indeed anything you want to call it. I'm going to call it func for function parameter over to this requires login, and then calling the function itself. So now I'm going to run it again, and we see the words hello world come out, which is what this function is doing. So let's backtrack here and think about what is happening again, because this is quite a confusing area. We are defining the function, and then we're passing it over to our decorator in here, who is calling the function. And then that is executing the my function down here, which is printing the words hello world. However, something interesting is that we cannot do this. We cannot now call my function down here. It actually gives us an error saying none type object is not callable. So my function doesn't actually exist outside of this sort of context because of the way that it was passed to the requires login function, or the decorator. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell Python that this decorator should extend this function, add some functionality to it, without changing the original function. So let's do that. And the way we do that is by using indeed another decorator called wraps. And we say wraps func, and then we tell it the decorated function. So what this does is it tells Python, hey, this decorator here takes in a function, but we want to wrap that function with another function. So here we could say print hi, func, and then print hello, for example. So that's kind of what we want to do, but it's not quite what we want to do. So I'm going to pass, for now, I'm going to import this functools.wraps there. And notice that now, if I run func here, then nothing is going to happen. And indeed, nothing gets printed out. Even if I now can run my function, and now something will get printed out, which is none type. So it's not quite there yet. We still have to return something from here. And what we're going to return is the decorated function from there. And from here, we're going to return the function itself. So now we get the words hello world out. Okay, so confusing stuff. The first time I did this, I thought I have absolutely no idea what's going on. So let me try and help you out here. This function gets passed to the requires login decorator, and then we tell Python we're going to wrap that function that we just passed with this other function. And then what this function does is it can do things. It can say print hi, for example. And then after it does some things, it's going to return the original function that we passed in, so my function. It's going to return that, and then it's going to return a decorated function. But notice how there is no opening and closing bracket at the end. So what this is returning is the function definition here. And now this decorated function is what is going to substitute the contents of my function. So when we call my function, really what we are calling is this decorated function here. So when we press play, now we get hi and hello world, because this decorated function is replacing the contents of my function. And then we're printing hi, and then we're returning the function there. So the first maybe 10 times that I did this, I thought, no idea, no clue. And I know this is a confusing part of Python, but please bear with me. So what can we do, for example, if my function takes in a couple of parameters, x and y? And then what it does is it, for example, returns x plus y. And we don't actually need the brackets there. So it returns x plus y. So how do we tell Python that there are a couple of arguments there that need to be used? And the way we do that is we say, function, you've got a bunch of arguments, which are args and quargs. I want to use those arguments. So what this is doing, what func, args, and quargs is essentially any argument that the function can take is these two arguments. So args are things like, say, func 5 and 6. 5 and 6 here are args, and quargs are things like func x equals 5, y equals 6. So these are keyword arguments that have names. Args are those that have no names associated with them. So what we're telling it here is, func, call yourself with all the unnamed arguments and all the named arguments that I know. But of course, we don't have any of these, don't exist yet, so we have to put them here in the decorated function as well. So now what is going to happen is it's going to say, decorated function, you've got any number of unnamed arguments and any number of keyword arguments. I don't know what those are and I don't care, but we're going to call the func original function, which is my function, using all the arguments that you've received. So when we return decorated function, remember that replaces my function. We can put here any number of arguments, and those are going to be applied in here. So we can now say 5 and 6, and we're going to have to print, because this my function is now returning things, and we can see that 11 gets printed out. Notice that if we put 7 as well, we get an error because my function takes 2 positional arguments, but 3 were given. So here it is calling my function, but when we return the decorated function, that is returning the entirety of this content, so hi as well as the function. And indeed you can see that hi gets printed out here before calling my function. So this is confusing, I know it. And I'll be answering questions whenever you have any questions. I'm always available to answer them, as you know. But I would recommend exploring around the area, search the internet as well to find out what these things mean, and try and understand it carefully, because and implement it as well, because it is a complicated area. Anyway, so what we want to do in this decorated function is say, if email is not in session.keys, or session email is none, we want to return a redirect to the URL for users.login user, and we have to import session, we have to import URL for, then we have to import redirect, and Python was not the smartest there. There we go. So we're returning a redirect to URL for. If that didn't happen, then we just return the function that was originally called, and finally we return a decorated function that is going to replace the other one. Okay, so now I'm going to delete that, and this is our decorator here. And what we're going to add in the URL for is a Flask only property, which is next, and that is going to be request.path. And what it's going to do is it's going to redirect the user to the login user endpoint with a next parameter, and when they log in, they're going to go into that next. So basically, if they try to access the create alert and they're not logged in, they will redirect to login user, and then when they log in, they will go back to that create alert page. So Flask is very smart in dealing with things like that. So let's go over it again. We are going to apply the user decorators.require login here, and we're going to have to import user decorators. So import ssc.models.users.decorators as user decorators. We're going to import that, and it says it cannot find, it requires login. We're going to change that, require login. No, actually, we're going to leave it as requires login. So we're going to apply that decorator to this create alert method. And then what that's going to do is it's going to get the entire create alert method and pass it here as func. So func is now create alert. And then we're going to say we're going to wrap create alert with this decorated function. And what this decorated function is going to do is it's going to check whether the email is set, and if it's not, going to redirect to the login user, and then it's just going to return create alert. So we're not going to change anything in the function itself. We're just going to check for the email and then just return the function as normal. It's going to pass through. And finally, we're going to return this decorated function. So really, what create alert is that decorated function. It's that method that says check for the email, and if it's not set, redirect to user login, and if not, just do what is in this method. And that's what that decorator is doing. And decorators are extremely powerful, and if you search around the internet for Python decorators, there's a lot of tutorials and a lot of different use cases for decorators, and they really simplify your life a lot. So I'm going to copy user decorators, and I'm going to paste it down here, because in order to deactivate an alert, we're going to need to log in. To get an alert page, we're also going to need to log in. And this endpoint actually is no longer necessary, because this is the alerts for a user, so we no longer need that. We've got that in the user views. And then I'm going to go to the user views, and I'm going to import it as well. Import src models users decorators as user decorators. And then I'm going to say that in order to access a user's alerts, you need to log in. And you need to log in because session email is being accessed in this method. If it's not set, we're going to redirect to the login page. And if it is set, then this is never going to give us an error because it is set. And the logout, I don't think you need that. And check user alerts, we don't really have anything in there yet, and I think this method might actually end up being deleted, so we don't need that there either for now. Okay, so quite a long video, and I apologize for that, explaining how to create our own requires login decorator, and hopefully that was clear. If not, as I said, rewatch the video, try and find other ways of explaining it online and other tutorials where they explain with different use cases, and of course ask questions in the course discussions below or to the side, and I will help you as best I can. So thanks for that, and I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're going to be adding some content to be able to display an alert's details. As you remember, when we go to our alerts and we click on one, we just get the alert name. So let's change that and actually show some information about the alert. What we're going to do is change this alert item name to be essentially the page header. So div class is page-header, and then the h1 is going to be alert, and then small is going to be for alerts.item.name. Okay, so if we refresh that, now we get alert for Dexter, all good. And now we can say P, last price found was strong, and here we say alert.item.price, and another P, last checked on strong, and here we say alert.lastchecked.strf time, and then that. So we know how to do all this. We refresh, we can get the details there. Okay, all that is good. It doesn't really give us anything apart from what we already had on here. So let's make it give us some more options. We're going to add a few buttons that is going to let us visit the website where the item is on sale, or deactivate the alert, or recheck the alert's price manually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a panel. Panel and panel default are the two classes that we need. And what that does is, if we go back here and refresh, it now adds a panel, which as you can see is very thin, so much so that it actually looks like a line. And we're going to add a panel body. Panel body. And now that adds some more spacing there. So that tells us, okay, we're going to put something in this panel, and what we're going to put is just a few buttons, a few A's, a few anchors. A class. For the first button, we're going to allow the user to go to the website of the item. So it's going to be btn-default. I'm not going to give it any special styling. And the href is going to be alert.item.url. And the role is going to be a button. And what that is going to say is a visit site. So when we refresh, and we now get a button to visit the website of the item. Fantastic. The next button is going to allow us to deactivate the alert. So a class is going to be btn-danger, and that's a red button. And the href is going to say URL for alerts.deactivate alert. And that is the view that we've got here to deactivate an alert. That doesn't do anything for now, but we're going to change that soon. The role is going to be a button, and this is going to say deactivate alert. So when we refresh the page, we now get an error because I probably didn't name it correctly. Deactivate alert. Of course, it takes an alert ID, so that is why it is telling me that something is incorrect. There we go. So deactivate alert. Make sure to not forget any parameters, or else Flask will not like that. And finally, the class btn-warning, which is a yellow one, is going to be href URL for alerts dot check alert price. And my guess would be that would also take an ID, and that hasn't been created yet, so we will create that. Alert underscore ID is alert dot underscore ID. The role is a button, and what that does is it check alert price. Okay, so now we've got these three things here. Well, one of them, as we said before, doesn't exist yet, so that's why we're getting a routing error. It's telling us the route that we've selected doesn't exist. So let's go into the alert views and make that. And that's going to be alert blueprint.route, and that's going to be check price for the string alert ID. And then we say def check alert price with the alert ID as a parameter. And what this is going to do, very simple, say alert.findById with this alert ID dot check price. And we're going to need to make that as well. Return redirect to URL4 of the current module get alert page, which is this one here, where the alert ID is alert._ID, or in fact alert ID. So let me explain what is going on here. But first let me import these things. Up here, redirect. Okay, so what is happening and why did I go so quickly? Well, I went quickly because I think you already know what I'm doing here. We've seen this over and over again. What we're doing is we're defining the route that has check price and then accepts an alert ID. We're passing that as a parameter that comes through our URL. Then we're finding that alert by ID, and we're going to call a check price method, which is going to reload the alert's price. And finally, we're going to redirect the user to this get alert page here for the alert ID that we've just received. So, okay, let's go into the alert and let's actually call that method. It's not called check price. Sorry, that's completely my bad. It's called load item price. Yeah, there we go. So now, when we go back here and refresh, check alert price. There we go. Now we've got that route, and we can now check the alert price. So notice how the last checked for this item was 31st of January, and I'm going to check alert price, and now that should refresh and say the 2nd of, so the 1st of February, which is today. Fantastic. So now we've got this method, this endpoint that is going to refresh an alert's price manually, and that's just so our users can click the button, essentially. Deactivate alert right now is not going to do anything. If we press it, we'll most likely get an error. Yes, indeed. The U function did not return a response, which is telling us that this deactivate alert function doesn't do anything. And that's true. So let's fix that up and make it deactivate the alert. So I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be dealing with deactivating alerts. And now I already know what this method is going to look like, because it's actually going to be very similar to this one down here. It's going to be alert.findById with that alert ID that we're passing in through the URL dot deactivate. And I know that method doesn't exist yet, but we're going to create it just in a moment. And then what we have to do is just return a redirect to the users.user alerts page. So that is the list of alerts that our user can see. And we don't need to pass in any parameters to that. So that's that. Now let's go and create the deactivate method, which is going to involve a wee bit more work. So let's go into the alert model and create the deactivate method. So this is going to be not a class method. It's just going to act on the currently selected alert. And this is going to say self.active is false, and then self.save to Mongo. So what that is going to do is going to change this self.active property of the alert and then save to MongoDB that change. However, self.active doesn't exist yet, so we're going to have to create it. So down here, self.active is going to be true by default, and we're going to get that here, active, there. Active is true by default, And what we're going to say here is self.active is active. So what this is doing is it's saying, okay, alert, now you're going to be receiving one extra thing from the database, which is whether you're an active alert or not. And then you're going to store that as self.active. So we're going to have to save that into the database as well. So under here, let's say active is self.active. Okay, so what this is now doing is it's saying self.json, you're now going to return an active key that contains whether the alert is active or not. The alert constructor now is accepting an active parameter, so it's going to be true by default. And now we can have a deactivate method as well, which it actually kind of makes sense to probably have an activate method too, right? So activate self.active is true, and then save to Mongo. Okay, so now let's go back in here and refresh that. And now go here and notice how nothing changes, but in the database we can actually see that db alerts.find, this alert has active is false. So that actually worked, but of course now we need to change the button to say activate alert if the alert is deactivated. So let's do that. I'll see you in the next video. So welcome back. In the last video we looked